pleasure. Thanks, Ashley. I'm here with two of the leading public intellectuals, young public intellectuals in the field. They have written two wonderful books, The Art of Screen Time by Anya and The New Childhood by Jordan Shapiro. And I think that what we'll be talking about is this kind of burgeoning digital media and learning movement, and what does it have to do with parenting and educating our young ones today. So first question, who's your favorite Muppet and why? No. We'll get to that. We'll get to that later. All right, so Anya, you have kind of taken on a really interesting perspective with Michael Pollan. You want to say really quickly what your moniker is?
Yeah, so I set out to write The Art of Screen Time. My previous books are all about education, and then I had my own kids, and I was really struggling with the disconnect between how we talk about screens at home with families, which is mostly about guilt and shame and fear, versus the promises that were being made about kids and screens at school. And it was just such a wild disconnect that I knew that I had to try to square that circle somehow. And so after diving into the research and talking to like 500 parents with surveys and interviews, I came up with, I cribbed from Michael Pollan's food rules, where he says, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. And I came up with the slogan, enjoy screens, not too much, mostly together.
And so I think that that's a brilliant moniker. We're all sort of facing all these difficult it used to be, work family, balance, and now so much of the dialogue, I think, is about the digital diet. Mm-hmm. Can you say a little bit about where The Art of Screen Time comes out on this notion?
Yeah, I think that, first of all, we have to recall, right, that we're in a first wave with these mobile devices, and they're in most of our memories before and after. And a couple things that might not be obvious about how they've changed, especially family life, it's not so much about time, right? Because we know that young children's dosage of technology and blooping things has not gone up so much. But what has happened is that the devices have different affordances, and so there's different kinds of experiences around them. So number one is that they're so engaging for very young kids. Kids love the interaction, and that is something that infants adore, right? And then the second part is they tend to enclose each family member in their own experience. And that's something that the television didn't do. It's pretty new. And then the third thing I think that's often overlooked is that mobile devices come with us everywhere. Okay, you know that. But what's crazy is that we can now see and judge what other parents are doing. And so one of the most, I think, brilliant but also evil studies that was done was by Jenny Radesky, brilliant researcher, where they went to a fast food restaurant and they watched the family groups at the fast food restaurant. And they found, that 80% of caregivers engrossed in their phones, making, statements in a robotic manner while pushing the kids' hands away from their phone, right, while the kids are pleading. And so this is really like imprinted on us, and it connects with so many other things in the discourse around feminism and should women be working, and should they be with their children all the time, and parenting and intensive parenting, should we be paying attention to our kids all the time? And so there's so much unexamined baggage that we're bringing to our judgments around the little triad, or maybe now it's a quad with the kid device and parent and device.
Yeah. You spoke to about 500 people, and admittedly it wasn't a representative national survey. But what surprised you about what the adults in children's lives had to say about technology, and also explain to everybody that you do focus on young children, but also on older kids too.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the Art of Screen Time really takes in all of childhood, and obviously, a huge amount of the conversations around teenagers right now, but I think early childhood is important. I have a 2-year-old, so in researching and talking with families, they are very afraid and very confused. The guilt and the shame becomes almost a reflexive feeling that people mention, and then when you get talking with parents, they often they're talking about what other parents are doing. So it's very social, and they can't help themselves but judge and argue and complain and disagree. And I think that's because this is so unresolved, and we don't have any wise voice of reason that's coming in to tell us what's good and what's bad. And so what I'm really trying to do is getting parents to look at their own lives online as well, because I think social media is, Dr. Google is the new Dr. Spock, and social media is the new back fence, and parents are coming together sometimes in wonderful, empowering ways, and then you have the anti-vaxxers right? So what happens when parents get together online? A whole lot of things, and some of them are great and some of them are not so great.
Yeah, well, more on Dr. Google later, perhaps. Jordan, let's get you into the mix. So,
First, can I say, Anya, you are the wise voice.
Oh,
well, she has already proven that, and now it's your turn to show us some of your sage advice. So you've written a book called The New Childhood, Raising Kids to Thrive in a Connected World. And I know you a little bit, Jordan, because you're also a senior fellow at the John Gans Community Center. You're pretty provocative. And you've basically made the case that what we're doing now, especially in education and education reform, isn't really working, that kids are bored to tears, and there's something about the digital explosion that's not being well understood. Can you say a little bit about your main takeaways?
Yeah, well, in what you're talking about in education, I'll start with education because I talk about all of it: family, the experience children are having, what it means to be a child in our current time, which we often don't talk a lot about. We talk a lot about what we need to do for children, but not about what it feels like for children. Yeah. But specifically to your question about education, part of what I say is I think we have this odd myth when we talk about school and education that there's such a thing as conventional, right? And this notion that what we do, you hear this all the time, right? Oh, school hasn't changed in 100 years, which is just nonsense. It's changed so many ways. Anyone who's an educator here can tell you how many times they've had to change or how many times they've resisted changes, right? It's always constantly changing. Things are always constantly changing. And this idea that we're only in a new change kind of drove me crazy. And that got me to start, really I wanted to describe what this means that we're moving into a new context and that we are always adapting to new contexts, right? It's not that we suddenly have something new we need to adapt to. It's the job of parents, the job of teachers, the job of educators, the job of grown-ups has always historically been to go, how do I take old values and make them remain meaningful and relevant in new contexts? And for some reason, we're at this strange block where we feel like it's going to be harder this time than ever before. And I'm not really convinced, if we could get over that block. I think that most grown-ups, most parents, and most teachers actually know exactly how to make a lot of the decisions if they could lose the fear a little bit.
Yeah. One of the things that you argue that I found so interesting, and it seems like an obvious point, but we don't act as if we know what to do about it, is so much of what goes on in education writ large is around a future that we can't even imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, we're trying to imagine it. We're trying to create all sorts of different pathways for learning. Can you say a little bit more about how that
you hear this all the time, and I always go, wait, was there a time where people could imagine the future, right? Like there's never been a time where you could imagine the future.
You can imagine it.
Right, you might be able to imagine it, but you never knew what was coming, right? There's so many things about my own childhood that were completely unimaginable to my grandparents, right? And I'm sure about my kids that they are completely unimaginable. And so I was really sort of bothered by this narrative that we were at a unique time. Instead, I think we have so many models, so many historical models about how you manage change, about what matters even as context change. That being said, you still need to think a lot about what that context is. And what we often do, and this is one of the things that I did a ton of research about when writing this book, was what we often do is we start to imagine that those things that we once designed in order to adapt for previous technologies are the essential thing, right? So one of the examples I talk about a lot in the book is the sandbox is a 20th century invention, right? Like it was developed in the 20th century. The way that we think of playgrounds was developed in the 20th century in order to deal with a changing economic and technological paradigm. And we're running around screaming, we need to preserve that at all costs. No, we need to preserve the things that teaches at all costs. We need to preserve those values at all costs, but we may need to reimagine what those playgrounds look like in order to make it even more relevant, those values, in a changing world.
Yeah. So all of us here at ASU, GSV, at least at some level, believe in the potential of digital media or digital technology to, if not transform lives, improve relationships and improve learning outcomes. Both of you sort of take a little bit of a view of this as, yes, maybe, but the potential is largely untapped, at least in some respects. Can you say a little bit about your perspective on what's been untapped, what's been tapped, and what needs to be sort of the next approach to using technology in new and interesting ways?
So I've been covering the education technology space for a little over a decade. And in that time, it's been through a hype cycle, and I've been through a hype cycle. And I've seen a lot of different successes and failures. And I guess what fundamentally seems to me to be the things we always return to is that using digital education to unlock the promise of education is really, really hard, and it involves a great deal of faith in the autonomy of learners, and also in the strength of community. You need really strong communities, and you need not to be controlling what students are doing. And so when you look at Seymour Papert, or you look at the foundational geniuses.
Who was Seymour Papert?
Seymour Papert, from MIT, who created the first programming language for children, who backed the first
logo.
One Laptop per Child programs in schools, who really fundamentally believed. He was a developmental psychologist and an AI specialist. He did all of these things before anyone in this room did them. And he believed so fundamentally that children needed access to the intellectual tools that were represented by digital technology. They needed to be creators and to be participants in their own learning. And that is the one thing that we can never seem to get right, because in schools, we're always trying to control what kids are doing. And we're always trying to control the outcomes and measure the outcomes. And so when you're doing that, you're really working at cross purposes with the fundamental idea, the potential that I find so interesting, which is this Montessori 2.0. Or it's not even actually Montessori. Montessori is more planned and organized than the image that someone like Papert had about how children could learn through immersion in the world of technology.
And so Anya and Jordan both are, I call them scholarly journalists. I mean, they've done a ton of research in addition to their reporting in these books. And I mean, dig into like a couple of studies, you guys, that kind of show off the modern day, Papert. Like you talked about how to get a start on this in your book. Like what would be the habits of mind that you would expect to see among the adults in children's lives right from the start that would allow them to deploy technologies in a more useful way? And you can praise Sesame if you want to.
I talk about it from a parenting perspective. I talk about Diana Beaumorin's structure of warmth versus structure in parenting, that parents can be, they can be highly over-structured and harsh, that demanding, authoritarian. They can be totally checked out, permissive. They can be warm, but not structured, that's permissive. They can be totally checked out, that's neglectful. Or you can be high on the dimensions of warmth and structure. And that's kind of the emotional temperature that you want to be around when you're parenting, and also just caregiving or teaching young children. You need to be encouraging, but also have some ideas of routines. And I think that listening to kids, being curious about them and celebrating them, and understanding that they take their lives very seriously is something I think that.
And where does tech come in? So
yeah.
Tech sort of comes in an interesting way.
Yeah, I think the way technology and digital media can come in together is, it has been a radically inclusive vision. Something like Sesame has come in to say that, parents are different and families are different, but there are some things that we can provide to everyone, and that children can kind of encounter on their own. And that really is. That's the huge bet that something like Sesame made, the case that they proved in television, and the case that we're trying to prove today.
Yeah, but not yet in digital.
Not to the same extent. Can I add
Jordan.
To that? I think that's a great point. And if you look at what Sesame did, right, that was still the television at the beginning, and it was very passive. And we have so much research talking about the importance of play. We have that people tend to think of as separate from digital. But I think that digital, I think games, I think interactive platforms, I think tablets have the potential to minimize that play gap, right? That gap to distribute more play to more kids, to create more equitable play that's actually designed in ways that allow kids to take control of their own learning and their own ability to experiment. And it's not just that I think that in terms of that has the potential to distribute and create access. If we're moving into a world, and I'm pretty sure we are, maybe someone can argue with me, but I'm pretty sure we're moving into a world where screens are ubiquitous. I'm pretty sure that. Let's see, how many screens do I see right now? Just looking around, I haven't tracked my own time or anything, but I'm pretty sure sure that 70% of my interactions, professional, romantic, personal, happen mediated through a screen at this point. So our kids are moving into a world that looks like that, and we want to make sure that they do that in the most ethical way, in the kindest way, in the happiest way, in the most fulfilled way. They need the practice playing with those tools in order to be able to do it. We already know this. We know that the more you let kids play with pencils, the better they're going to get at writing, right? We know the more that you let them play with smartphones, the better they're going to get at smartphones. Of course, you have to curate that play. I don't mean just like hand it to kids and leave them by themselves. And so much of what I write about is how parents can guide their kids through that play so that that becomes they learn the positive lessons about how to live a holistic life in which tech is integrated rather than the life we are current, which I call it we're all currently living the binge and purge digital detox mindset, right? Where we all just stare at it for a while and then feel guilt, stare at it for a while and then feel guilt. And I don't want my kids to do that. I want my kids to actually know how to read a text message and not feel bad about it and put it down and focus on what they're doing. I want them to know when that's a positive time, when that's not a positive time. I don't see any way to teach my own children that by going, hey, you've got 2 hours a day where you're allowed to use screens by yourself in your room, right? How are they ever going to learn that? The only way they're going to learn to do that is if I sit with them and start to get them to practice playing. That playing is just practice. It's just good practice for being a grown-up, right? Without high stakes.
So I read both books, hoping and praying that there was some level of disagreement. And on page 117 or something, Jordan takes one little one-sentence shot at Anya in which he says, I'm wary of a perspective that sees, referring to the digital, balanced diet metaphor. I'm wary of a perspective that sees digital devices as a temptation and imagines that parents are responsible for managing their kids' ability to exercise restraint. You sort of referred to this just a moment ago. Yeah. Can you explain?
Yeah, you found the one sentence. Wow, and that's after I cut all the other bad ones, right? No, just kidding.
You should hear what Anya said about your book.
I mean, look. Of course, you can only find one because I really there's nothing I have to complain about in what Anya's written. But I think we're talking about very different things. Anya, the scope of Anya's book is very much about how parents manage today, and I'm sort of imagining the future and imagining that as long as we still maintain this idea of screen time versus non-screen time, that's a problem. So I am very wary that becomes the norm. That's certainly the way to consider it right now in this current moment of time. But in the long run, if parents continue to think of screen time versus non-screen time rather than a life integrated with digital technologies, sometimes screens, sometimes not screens, but AI is a digital technology. Like, it's already integrated into our lives. We can either be aware of it and do that in a smart way, or we can not. And there's a lot of dangers.
I mean, I hate to say this, but I feel like we're very much on the same page, but we also break down on very traditional gender guides, because you are literally the dad on the couch playing video games with your sons.
That's right.
And I am literally the mom being like, what should our rules be? Let me make a chart. And dads are like culturally set up to play with their kids. They roughhouse with them. They introduce risk. They say, hey, what's the big deal? Let's see. It's fun. And moms are totally placed in this role where they're like the instructors and the moral teachers and the keepers of the home. And so it's just patriarchy. Maybe us shake out in this way.
That's right.
But they're both really, really necessary. And they're both really important. And I think we both completely agree that it cannot just be parents. First of all, it's not just parents' job, it's society's job, it's educators' job. And it's not just parents' job to say no. It's parents' job to figure out, how am I going to say yes? How am I going to encourage it? And I'm looking for more ways to enjoy digital time alongside my kids, because I know that that's the path to really help them, like you said, play and rehearse and grow into the roles that they're going to have. And I'll tell you a triumphant story if I'm
Go
able
ahead,
to.
yeah. Well, before you do, I just want to point out this male-female dichotomy.
Yeah.
Take a look at the imagery on Jordan's book
God.
versus the imagery. I'm just saying. I'm not psychoanalyzing you guys,
Let's
but
not.
please continue.
Hey. All
Didn't
right.
expect that.
No, I did not expect that from Michael. I'm very, very surprised. No, but I was just going to say that, so the other day my daughter came home and she said, I heard that there's a bad lady on YouTube and she tells you to kill yourself. or she'll kill your family. And this is what I heard on the playground. And I said, this is Momo, right, the digital boogeyman. And I was like, well, did the kids that told you, do they actually see it? She was like, no. And I was like, how could Momo know where you live? It's just a video. She's not talking to you. She was like, yeah. I was like, how could you ask a question next time if somebody tells you something like that you will figure it out and you won't worry about it? And she was like, yeah, I could ask them if they actually saw it themselves.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's the like, you know, that there is scary stuff out there, and we also can equip our kids to meet it.
Right. In a minute, we're going to ask you to, you know, a couple of questions from you all. So get ready. You now have a shot to ask each other a question. So when you're reading each other's book,
Okay.
what did you want to ask Jordan?
Well, I mean, I did interview him on NPR.org. It was a great interview, and people loved it.
What did you ask him that we should all know about?
Well, I think that the thing I would have asked you, I mean, I love the historical analogies that you use, and it is always really wonderful to think about Plato and Young in the context of, you know, Fortnite and video games. But I do sometimes wonder that
Which he does.
Yeah, which he does, which you should read the book to find out about. I do worry because I really try to be cognizant of the fact that there are some kids that are not okay.
Yeah.
And with the sanguine message that parents will be wanting to hear, you know, is there any chance at all that of the kids that are not okay, some of them will, you know, how do you acknowledge that fact?
Yeah, and of course I get this question all the time about the kids, because there are absolutely people who develop unhealthy relationships, and there's a lot of with devices or video games, and there's a lot of kids right now that's happening.
And Anya digs into the research on that, by the way.
Yeah. You know, this. You know, people develop unhealthy relationships to lots of things. We develop unhealthy relationships to sex and to money and to food and to work, and we can do all of those things. And in none of those cases do we decide that food and money and sex and work are the evil, right? Instead, we acknowledge that there's probably some other issue that has led to that, and that issue needs to be addressed. So absolutely, when those relationships develop, they need to be addressed. Parents need to intervene. Parents may need to send their kids to the fancy new rehabs, for all I know, depending on how serious that is. But we also need to remember that is only addressing the symptom, and that what the kids really need is your support and your love as they find out what the deeper problem is. Otherwise, they'll just find something else to deal with that with. And I get really scared when I hear all the scapegoating of Fortnite, right? Because and I'm not saying I think Fortnite is great, but I'm going, if we start blaming society's problems on Fortnite, we're going to miss the real problems, right? And there are real things we need to address, and we may need to stop a little bit of Fortnite for some kids, but that's not the same as addressing the thing that is causing them to be escaping into that world.
Besides that one sentence slam, do you have anything else you want to ask Anya?
No, I don't know. I mean, I don't think so. Anya's book is full of so many well researched. I mean, I keep it by my desk because I have so many interviews where I have to be able to answer questions about research, and there's not a better version that completely summarizes all the research around screen time, all the current research, and so and does it fairly, right? I mean, there's tons of people who have written books that do it in a way where they just cherry pick the ones that prove their bias, but Anya doesn't do that. So so I don't.
I tried to divide them, but didn't work.
Yeah, it
do we have a couple? Do we have a couple of questions? Anyone? Yeah.
I spent most of my
Say who you are.
Brian Katie, I'm the CEO of Newton.
Great.
I spent most of my time in my life in higher education. I have 4 kids, 9 through 19. In all your research, all the blogging, your books, what surprised you the most?
Yeah, I was going to ask that. That's a great question.
I think the biggest thing that I stumbled over in the beginning of looking at the research was the connection between screens and sleep. And you're going to say, duh. But the fact is that the sleep researchers have all the goods on how technology impacts sleep, which in turn impacts all the other things we're worried about: mood, behavior, weight, depression, consolidation of memories and early learning, And so screens, and they do it, it does it through a really simple mechanism. So whenever anyone says, oh, all screen time is not the same, in most cases that's true. But when you're talking about a tiny device that shines a blue light into your face from 10 inches away, yeah, all screen time is the same. And then the cortisol that's produced when you're engaging with exciting content or just interesting stuff or something your friend posted, that's all the same too. It's a very primitive kind of interaction. And so I really feel like the sleep researchers have it's so easy to overlook. We are a very underslept culture, but especially for little kids, because their sleep patterns are changing all the time. And I think if they can show that naps are fading out earlier, as kids that are more rambunctious are given screens to supposedly calm them down, but actually it's stimulating them, that could have a real serious knock-on effect for school readiness and other things. And then obviously teenagers, it's all the bad stuff. I mean, kids that don't sleep are the kids. There's a lot of things that say like, what you could think of as a teenager is actually just somebody who hasn't slept. It's like, oh, they're bored, they have a lack of focus, they're
Familiar with that
surly,
creature.
they're unkempt. Like, they're a person who hasn't slept.
All right, another question? Oh, in the back, sorry. Say who you are.
Hi, my name is Lila. I'm the Executive Director of Education Leaders of Color.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious to hear what your research shows about screen time, particularly for low-income families, their use, and how maybe some of these interventions can make it down to our various communities.
No, thanks for that question, Lila. And actually, I wanted to add,
Yeah.
so much of your research, informal research in this respect, it was diverse, but not maybe as diverse in terms of low-income families.
Yeah, it could definitely be more diverse. Number of things. So Lynn Schofield Clark did a great book a few years ago where it was a qualitative study of families at different socioeconomic levels. And what she documented, interestingly, was a positive pattern among the working class families in that they shared their screen time more often, and they talked about it more. So even though they weren't making the high-end choices as far as content, it was overall more positive because they were more likely to discuss the shows that they were watching and the things that they were doing. We now are in a situation where the smartphone divide has gone away. 98% of all families with young children have at least one digital device in the home. I mean, I don't want to say flip it, that it has all gone away. There is still a divide in terms of type of device, but in terms of screen time, there's not really a divide. And so what we're now concerned about is what settings are children in, what kind of supervision are they getting, is there interest in trying to influence parents to help kids make quote unquote better choices. And that's a huge task, I think, in front of Sesame and a lot of other organizations. Which
Jordan, you want
to
to comment on equity concerns?
I mean, what would I add, there's not a lot yet that I'd like to see, and I think you're getting to that it's going to come, which is really a lot about how the devices are being used on a really granular level, right? Like we've done a lot in terms of going, who's using it for just video and who's using it for games. But I'm sort of interested what kind of games, how the different kinds of experiences happen. Because I think then, because again, almost everything in my perspective assumes that digital is our new context, right? Not one thing. Right, so therefore I want to know how that context is different. It's going to end up playing in the same kind of questions as questions about how vocabulary is built, what kind of vocabulary gets used in different kinds of digital media, and I think we really need to get down to that because otherwise we'll just end up replicating all of the same things in a brand new context.
Okay.
Well, I just want to mention really quickly, I think a fascinating area is English language learners and the different ways that they use technology and the role reversal that can take place sometimes where children or young people in a family are the translators, but they also might be the digital concierge. And so is there a potential for learning and for kind of celebrating and upholding those interactions where the kid is the digital ambassador of the family?
Yeah. And shameless plug, Layla and others, for the Jungans Cooney Center's research, which has dug into the different ways in which low-income and diverse families experience media, which is often different than some of the profiles that you see of the more wealthy kids. All right, we're coming to a wrap. Okay. I wanted to ask you two quick final questions. Okay. You guys have been appointed as members of the transition team for the new president in 2020.
Who is it?
I can't tell you. I know who it is, but I can't tell you. And you have been asked to design the priorities for a $250 million digital media and learning fund, which is going to focus, because Chris Perry is now working in the White House, on early learning. and how to untap the potential of digital media for early learning. Where do we start?
I think I would encourage us to ask questions about less, I think the instinct people usually go to is the question about how to use the media or the digital in order to distribute learning, right? And I would much rather see us ask questions about how do we make sure we're preparing children with the kinds of thinking and the kinds of experiences that will allow them to be well, I was going to say autonomous, but also good citizens in a world where everything will be mediated through a device, right? How do we make sure that their mind has shifted in such a way they have the right habits of mind to be able to take these tools and leverage them in order to make the world they want to see, and hopefully the world we want to see too, because I've always been the don't prepare your kids for the world, prepare the world for your kids mindset.
Yeah. 250, $250 million, Anya.
I would get diverse parents and teachers and put them on teams with technologists and designers to create and imagine amazing learning experiences and to learn together so that they could also get training in stimulating those kinds of experiences with their kids and for their kids.
Okay. Final question.
All right.
One must do and one watch out as you think about the work that you have just completed in terms of the audience here, activating them over the next year. Must do, watch out. Jordan.
It's a hard one. One must
Send it
do.
to you in advance.
I know, but I assumed we would run out of time before they got to the last question. One must do, watch out.
You can just give me one or the other.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's going to be a similar variation on what I said for the last answer, which is, and they're going to go together as a must-do, watch out, right?
Okay.
Watch out, must-do, to watch out, which is we have so many things that there are so many dangerous challenges of the world we're entering into. There, whether we're talking about the bias with AI that could be programmed into it, whether we're talking about surveillance and privacy issues, right? There's so many dangerous things, and the only way that there's going to be a democratic solution to making sure democracy is preserved in that tech world is to make sure that an entire generation of kids is raised with the technological literacy to make informed decisions, thoughts, and take informed actions about how to respond to those dangers. Because I would say most adults are running around going, hey, I've heard there's a surveillance issue, but I don't know which way to vote on it.
Great. Anya, last word.
I mean, I would say that you can create amazing content and experiences for kids, but if you don't get the business model right, your incentives are going to be misaligned, and you're going to end up exploiting the heck out of the people that you reach, who we sometimes call users, which is a terrible way to speak about children.
Wonderful. Could you please join me in thanking Anya and Jordan for a terrific conversation?